I'm going to just sort of spend maybe 15 minutes, tell you a bit about my story and what I've been doing over the last 8 years now. And then I want to tell you a bit about what we do as a company, and hopefully I can walk away today with about 50 job applications because we desperately need some more people. So I was involved in Robot Wars a long time ago. Who's been watching Robot Wars? Good, room full of geeks, brilliant. So Robot Wars was based on actually quite a well-funded competition that happens all around the world. It's an awful collaboration of weird, strange, geeky people that come together and fight each other with all sorts of robots and bits of machinery. And it's actually quite well-funded. It's got a lot of corporate money involved in it, a lot of research places, and a lot of universities involved as well. And so I turned up. I was 10 years old. My parents both came with me. I'm like hand in hand. I had lights flashing in my trainers, and everybody else there is 50 plus. They've all got a beard, they've all got grey hair because you have to have grey hair to be an engineer in the UK, and I just played. So I made things out of, does this work? I made things out of toys, I made things out of anything I could find. There's bits of Lego in there, remote control cars that I took apart to make this stuff, and I just wanted to join in. And so I was mucking about in a weight class that had to fit in a 4-inch cube, and it had to weigh less than 150 grams, so it's kind of iPhone sized. And I just made things, and as I went through it, I found sort of specific challenges, specific things that I needed to do better, try and understand, and so I used Google to learn how to do the maths behind it, to learn how to use the design programs, and starting to design crazier and crazier things, until I got to the point where actually I couldn't do this stuff anymore. I was designing things that didn't work when I was taking them to school to use a pillar drill and a handsaw. I couldn't actually make anything that I was coming up with, but I could understand the maths and I could learn more and more of what I wanted to do to compete with these people. So I started going to meet more of these 50-year-old bearded engineers in the UK who control the body of engineering. And they laughed at me. So I took my pocket money and what I was earning from a paper round, and I'd take it in crumpled £5 notes, and I'd have all my drawings, and I'd say, here's a piece of billet aluminium, I need you to machine it like this, here's the money to do that. And they didn't want to do it. They couldn't understand why somebody of my age would ever have an interest in a machine shop, let alone want to pay them to do some work. And so they just wouldn't take any interest. And there was this running joke as I went around all of these different places trying to find somebody that would, spare 5 minutes to talk to me, that, oh, well, you should go out to China. Your pocket money will go further in China, you'll be able to afford more manufacturing. Off you go, let's pack you out to Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and see what happens. The joke's on them, because this was 8 years ago, and if you Googled Chinese factories, you didn't find sort of local factories. What you found was people who come from Europe, come from the Americas, and they'd taken their factories out to China. And so you had perfect communication with people who could understand what was going on. And so for me as a 14, 15-year-old boy at school, I could communicate via email and Skype with people that spoke very good English. And I didn't sort of have any troubles. And so I started sending money out, which came into all sorts of difficulties as I started trying to go to the bank and say, I need to make this bank transfer into a strange account in the middle of Guangzhou, and nobody wanted to touch it. They say, I'm not sending this out of your under-19s account. And so I went to my parents and asked them to send this money, and they weren't going to let me send money out to China. They had no idea what I was sort of trying to do, and they didn't trust anything. And so PayPal was conveniently sort of coming to fruition at that time, and you could create an account with just a name. So I changed my name and I became a PayPal entrepreneur and just sent all of my money and all of my pocket money out to China through PayPal. And I started making this stuff. I started making, a lot of what I was doing was pneumatics, so kind of a JCB, but scaled right down to sort of sub 150 grams. So it was quite complicated stuff. There was a lot of exciting maths and exciting sort of things that were pushing the limits of what even the people in the big corporate funded competitions were doing. And so they started to listen. They started to say, well, actually, this is quite interesting. I broke this piece on my car, or I lost the back of my remote control for the TV. Can you fix it? Can you 3D print me a new one? Can you CNC a new piece like this? And so I very quickly went into the world of dishwasher consultancy and starting to make things for, the little wheels in the dishwasher. Nobody sells a replacement for those. They charge you like 50 quid. So people would pay me £25 to design one and make one. And that started to escalate really, really quickly from, £25 jobs to £50 to £500. And people started to say, well, actually, this is quite interesting. This guy understands how to build supply chains. He understands how to run these factories out in China. He's understanding where the advantages are in these things. And most of the people involved in these robotics competitions were heads of engineering at, quite large organizations. So they start to say, well, let's take a punt on this. Let's say Here's a problem we've got at work. We're trying to cut this cost in this product. We produce 100 million a year. Josh, what would you do? Here's a couple £100 to have a look. And you get a few successes, and that sort of started to spiral. And we got to the point where actually they were saying, well, we don't quite understand how to globalize our supply chain. Currently, we produce everything locally. There's some cost advantages. We just don't know how to shake it up in our company. Can you come and have a look at that? Can you have a look at this? And then all of a sudden, that started to be introductions to their friends and people that they worked with. And suddenly, I lost all kind of figure. Nobody knew who I was. It was just this guy that solves problems. Everything's remote. You deal with him via email and Skype and telephone calls, and you just pay him. And most of the stuff I did was on success bonus. So there wasn't a risk in doing it. And so these companies didn't feel the need to do any due diligence. And so for 2.5 years, nobody asked how old their supply chain consultant was. Now you have to bear in mind that I was 15, 16, 17. So I was going to school during the day. I just about got my A-levels. I just about got my GCSEs, no A-levels. I'm going to maths lessons during the day. By 3 o'clock, I start to reply to things. Nobody ever thought to ask, why doesn't he do any work until 3 o'clock in the afternoon? And so I completely got away with this stuff. And I started to realize that actually I need to learn how to talk to humans. I was a proper engineer. So I would sit in my bedroom. Anyone who ever talks to me, I'd go bright red. I can't communicate with human beings. And so I decided that we're going to jump in at the deep end. I got a sales job in a bike shop. And I'm sitting there earning, 50, maybe 100 quid a day in a bike shop selling bikes. And I'd go home at night and I'd go and make £10,000 just changing a bolt by 5mm and doing something like that. And so it was a weird sort of double, triple life that I was running. And I got away with it for ages. And it was kind of the ignorance of me coming into these big companies that made it so successful. It was the fact that I didn't understand what was a stupid question that meant I could ask stupid questions. And so when I went into a big organization, I said, well, why do you do it like that? It sounded like I actually knew what I was talking about. I genuinely wanted to know why we do it like that. And so they started to unearth all of these, kind of legacy problems. Big companies are built on legacy. It's how it worked 50 years ago, how it worked since my predecessor handed over the job to me. It's how it's going to work from now on. And so when you went in and you asked a stupid question, you start to unearth all these inefficiencies that made sense 50 years ago. But in modern days and age, with modern technology, modern access to logistics and supply chain, you could find huge amounts of opportunity in big supply chains. And I got away with it until I was about 17 going on 18, and somebody called me up, one of the kind of lead contacts on one of the projects, and they said, well, I've got a question. How old are you? I'm 17. Why? Right. So within about 2 weeks, I very quickly was fired from almost every project I was on. And they'd discovered this through a blog that somebody had written about the work I was doing. They'd seen that this kid was running around flying out to China and doing whatever he was doing while he was still at school. And so they wrote about it. It was interesting. And didn't realize that was going to bring down my empire, age 17, unemployed. And so I was kind of left with nothing really. And so I started going to universities, and I went to look around all of the universities to understand, what could I do next? What would I study? And I went to all these engineering degrees, and I went to go in, the trial lectures and the trial days that you have, and I just couldn't get inspired. I'm sorry, there's loads of lecturers here, aren't there? I didn't visit here. And I just kind of couldn't get inspired by the courses. The courses were they were very hypothetical, they're very theoretical. And so when I came in, having spent 2-3 years in engineering and manufacturing, and you tell me that this works like this and everything's perfectly smooth and this is all perfect and brilliant, I just couldn't make it real because there were so many what-ifs in my head. And so I decided that wasn't going to be the path for me, and actually we needed to work out a way that an 18-year-old could supply to global businesses. And so I went all the way back to doing 200, 300, 500 pound jobs, trying to build myself back up because I'm under all these non-disclosure agreements. I can't talk about the work I've done, but I know what I'm doing. So now you've got a point where you've got to go back and validate yourself. So I spent probably 2 years just doing small jobs, started to hire some small people, started to try and crystallize what that opportunity was within big companies. And the opportunity really is almost communication inside of those companies. It's about how do we make innovation happen by actually understanding what innovation is and defining what that means. And so now, where are we now? 5 years in, the company is a global company. We're based in the UK, in Amsterdam, in Singapore, and China. We've got just over 100 corporate clients, and we run these R&D centers for them. We help them take products from very early stages, at the point where they've got a new technology they want to apply, or they've got a market they want to accentuate or play in, all the way through that engineering process, through the certification, and then through the supply chain. And so we help these companies scale up a product from 100 units through to 100,000 units, get that into market, test that market, and once that's validated, they start to make those capital investments. And so you see a huge amount of opportunity in this. You see some of the funniest stories I've heard are people in FMCG market, and they say, well, you know, we love making samples, but it takes us like 3 years to get it through our R&D lab because nobody's got any time for us. Then we need a factory to go and produce these samples. We spend £200,000 on those audits just to make sure the factory is suitable to buy from. Then we spend £5,000 on the actual samples themselves. We ship 10,000 units, we put them in our own warehouse, and we lose them because we can't talk to each other. These organizations are so stuck in the way that they work, and they're so stuck in being able to do what they do very well that they're not able to innovate at the kind of pace that's necessary nowadays. You look at some of the startups at Southampton, how quickly are these companies moving, how quickly are they getting to market, how quickly and on how small a budget are they able to do these things. And so it's no longer how we were maybe 10, 15 years ago, where if you had £100 million in the bank and a global client base, you could storm any small company. Actually, these companies are feeling a threat from the likes of 2 or 3 person companies that come out of incubators in universities. They're seeing that actually they may have a big market and they may have lots of money, but unless they can process and execute on these ideas and these new concepts, they're just not going to keep up. And that's kind of where we are. The sort of point of RPD is to go into all of these big brands and say, well, if you could test things, and you could understand, how to make these things happen quicker, if you could do what they do in 15 years, in 2 years, if you could get a product into market to test in 1 year, in 6 months, in 6 weeks, how much quicker can these companies evolve and grow and develop? And the heart of that is kind of around the definition of what innovation is, which is that slide. When you Google what is innovation, Google says that innovation is the process of innovating. And then when you talk to the Australian government and you ask them for business advice on innovation, they say, you should develop a strategic business plan that includes innovation to help the growth of your company. And so after that, you ask the question, what is innovation? And no one can really tell you. And I think the key part of this and the key part of understanding what innovation is not to think of innovation as ideas. Innovation is the process of executing on those ideas. Innovation is about looking at what could be and what, should be, and working out how quickly we can do that. And part of that is looking at it kind of like a funnel. So in the same way you look at sales and you look at something that, you have 100 potential sales, and after you qualify them, you've got 50 left, and you go through this process of killing things. And the most important part of innovation is going to be killing things. It's about understanding, well, actually what doesn't work and being able to test and find out what doesn't work as quick as you really can. Because the process of launching a new product looks like that, and that's about as simple as I could ever make it. That's the life cycle of a new product brought to market. You go from generating a concept through prototyping, you take it to a management committee or somebody of similar guys and they kill it. You take it to safety training and certification, somebody kills it. You take it into the market kills it. You take it into quantitative feedback, they kill it. You put it in qualitative feedback, they kill it. You take it into commercial, they kill it. Sometimes you get into scaling a market and it works a bit, but you find that actually only 1% of the potential market was there and you can't succeed with the product, you kill it. Occasionally you get it into the mid-market, it starts to become viable as a product, but a lot of the times you still kill it. And eventually there's that one product in every probably 1,000 that gets there. And you get there and you put that into market and that becomes a viable product. And so you understand just how many of those products end up in this museum of failed dreams and just how expensive that is. And so the process of innovation is not about finding that one. The process of innovation is finding everything that went wrong. And so we kind of looked at that as quite an interesting piece of, well, how do we find out what goes wrong? How do we help big companies and small companies find out what doesn't work? So we look at it as sort of 4 key stages. The first stage is about evaluation. It's about understanding, and getting contribution from a team or from a, even if it's 2 or 3 people, all the way up to having a 1,000-person group of an organization. How do we execute and how do we get those ideas through? And if you look at 3M, they quite famously, I think it's 15% of the time that employees at 3M have is to spend on just random products. Go and experiment and try things. And things that are successful, we'll try and develop as a company. Very famously, the Post-it note is a result of that. But far more exciting than the Post-it note is abrasive material, sandpaper. One of the things that the 3M team came up with is that when you use traditional sandpaper, what happens is it's sharp, and the second you use it, it blunts off. And so during that time, they found innovations in the actual crystals of sandpaper to become the most interesting and exciting sandpaper company in the world, where they found that actually they could get these crystals to shard off. And so by sort of promoting the idea that these teams and these people could contribute, and that showing these kind of clear contribution networks, I won't go through those slides because they're terribly boring, but around how they could communicate this opportunity to actually develop them. And by using that whole power of everybody they had involved in the team, they were able to find all of these ideas to fail, to find the good ones. And so the key here in this first stage is around empowering employees. It's around empowering people to contribute to ideas so that we can have as many as we can to start filling that funnel before we start cutting them off. The next stage is around prototyping, and this is where you really look at failure. If you look at Google Glass, how long did it take to prototype Google Glass? Oh, somebody, wild guess.
2 years.
1 day. So Google Glass was prototyped in 1 day, and that's not Google Glass as you see it today or as it was launched in the shops a couple of years ago. Google Glass was first prototyped as a backpack. They went through so many iterations. It was a computer on your back with a cable that thick running off to another computer with a giant headset and a little screen. And what they were trying to do is prove the most audacious point of what it is they're trying to do. And that's where we are in prototyping. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to find what's the most audacious new part of something we're trying to do, and we'll prove that. And as we go through, we get through into the larger and larger system of what it is that we need to prove. Because IBM didn't invent the personal computer, you know that Apple never invented the MP3 player, and Amazon certainly didn't invent the online shop. These are all the companies that were very successful at looking at that pipeline of innovation and looking at how we develop ideas through to the end and saying, we're not interested in that, we're interested in that bit. We're interested in where that piece of the innovation pipeline falls off and where it goes past that point, and how do we evolve and iterate and build on the things that don't work to generate ideas that do. And so it's about creating that environment that allows us to sort of get things wrong. Then it's about market testing. We had a project a long time ago now, two or 3 years ago, where an airline came to us and they said, we want to just change everything. We want to know what flying looks like in 30 years. You can look at the plane, you can look at the process of flying, you can look at how you book a ticket, you can look at marketing. Just tell us what the future of airlines is in 30 years. And so we started with a simple question. We said, what do your customers think? What do your customers want from an airline? And they gave us about 15,000 forms, not even in an Excel sheet, just 15,000 handwritten forms that have been scanned in. So, right, okay, before we even think about looking at those, how did you find these forms? How did you get this data from your customers? And they said, well, we do mostly long-haul flights. So after a 12-hour flight, we take people off the plane and we put them in a really dark grey conference room. We say, what did you think? Right. So these people have been on a plane for 12 hours. They're hungry, they're tired, they're bored, and the last thing they want to do is sit in a conference room and tell you their thoughts. But apart from that, when you're 8 hours into a 12-hour flight, you have no bloody idea what your thoughts are. You're not you're not anybody. You can't understand what you're doing. You don't understand exactly how you're dealing with things. You don't really have the same kind of consciousness that you might have during the day. And even then, humans instinctively lie. If I ask you, how was your day? It was probably good. Was it good? Well, it probably wasn't. Could have been great. It was just good. And so we looked at, well, actually, how could we really understand what was going on? So we looked at the concept of a supply chain where actually everything you put on that plane had a sensor in it. So how could you understand what people were genuinely doing? Could you use touch sensors, motion sensors, temperature sensors to say, well, you take your headphones off every hour for 10 minutes. Now I can see you're watching a series of hour-long TV programs. Well, that makes sense. But then somebody sitting next to you also takes their headphones off every hour for 10 minutes, and they're watching a 3-hour-long film. So can we correlate the data to something else? Is it that the headphones are more uncomfortable in men than they are in women, in adults than they are in children, and therefore they take them off every hour because it's a pressure point? Then can we look at pressure sensors and understand where those pressure points are? And how can we use all of this live and active data of what people are actually doing with our products to build into that cycle? So we can understand what doesn't work, we can use that data straight away to evolve and change and grow. And you're highlighting real failure points. You're not highlighting people's opinion, you're not highlighting people's what they thought they did with these products. You're actually seeing how people sit in a chair. And I tell you, the weirdest thing I've ever seen is how people sit in an airplane seat after about 10 hours of flying. I've had some people who look like they're upside down in that seat. And so that kind of process of market testing and scaling up and evolving new products it's about avoiding the fact that humans lie. It's about finding what actually happens to these products and helping real companies and real operations see what actually happens. And the last part is around market testing. Who makes more money? Go on, somebody. Pepsi. Pepsi makes more money because they realized that when they were running that war of kind of the sugary brown gloop with Coca-Cola, that they were never going to win this. And so they said, okay, well, what else do people buy when they buy soft drinks? They buy crisps and biscuits and chocolate. And so they said, okay, well, let's buy 10,000 bags of crisps. Let's stick our name on it. We'll come up with a brand and we'll stick it into the shops and we'll find out whether people buy it. And so they highlighted that they had the supply chain that already exists. They could already take things into shops. They already had that existing. They had those relationships. And so they just put those crisps onto one of their lorries and said, here, put these next to the Coke, next to the Pepsi, and we'll see what happens. And within days, they'd sold those 10,000 bags of crisps, and they built this entire empire off of an opportunity that already existed to them. And so this part around kind of early service and testing is about finding opportunities to test what you can with what exists, but also about controlling what happens. They didn't launch them as Pepsi Crisps, they launched them as another brand, so if it all went wrong, you wouldn't know. But it wasn't any skin off their back to do this. And you kind of see the same thing happening in software. Who's from New Zealand? Nobody? Good. Can talk about. Is that someone from New Zealand? Good. I can talk about them. The thing about New Zealand is it's very representative of Western culture, of American culture, Australian culture. But what you find is things don't escape from this weird little world. When somebody complains about something in New Zealand, you don't tend to find it elsewhere. And so what software developers are starting to do is they're starting to use opportunities like New Zealand to say, well, let's test it. Let's put something out here to 10,000 people in New Zealand. If they don't like it, we'll hear that feedback, but it won't spread. Whereas when you do your exclusive private beta in California, the second that you've launched that, before you've even had a chance to open your own analytics screen, there's someone in Hong Kong moaning that your product's crap. And so really what this market testing process is about is kind of understanding what is wrong, highlighting the things you knew were wrong, and also finding out what else is wrong, but controlling that feedback and giving you the chance to do that at a slow pace. So where you look at all these Kickstarter launches where people say, oh, we sold 100,000 units in our first week, and now we're a company with no experience of making anything that needs to deliver 100,000 units in 6 months. They're killing themselves because they're going out to market far too quickly. And so a lot of this process of innovation and bringing new products to market is about staging that and getting the first 1,000 out, the first 10,000 out, the first 100,000 out, and finding where the easiest opportunities to do that are. We've got to find those sort of small opportunities so that we can restrict the backlash of launching bad and sometimes overcomplicated products into market. And so what does innovation mean? When we look at all of that as a process and what RPD does for a lot of these companies and how we work with a lot of companies, what we're doing is we're facilitating execution. Innovation is that process of execution. It's not about new ideas, it's about making things happen and proving things don't work. I won't go through all of that because that's usually for big corporates that need to actually get on with something at the end of this. But really what we're trying to do as a company is we're trying to accelerate that pace of innovation. We're trying to understand that if we could take the process of launching a new product that used to be 15 years and make that 1 year, 6 months, 6 weeks, how much faster can these companies move, big and small? And that's what we're up to. So we're hiring at the moment. I'm here because I want to try and extract 20, 30, 40, 50 people, take you all home on the train with me, and we'll all start at Monday, 9 o'clock. So questions and answers, and I'm not giving out pay scales. Thank you. When you look at the kind of people that sit at RPD, they're the kind of people that turned up to their interview with a rucksack full of stuff, right? And they pulled that stuff out and they said, I made that because of this, I made this because of this, and I made this because of this. When they go home at 6, 7 o'clock, I mean, Nathan's done an internship, it's more like 11 o'clock, they either go home to do what they were doing during the day in their own rights, or they actually stay in the office and they do their own projects at work. Those are the kind of people that fit. So it's not necessarily around finding a specific culture. We're looking for people who genuinely have the intrigue and the kind of intuition to experiment with stuff, because those are the kind of people that these big companies need, and by bringing them into the system, they find those problems and they solve them. Well, I think that's where the most successful companies are, is, you know, when I showed that pipeline, it's the piece that comes out of the funnel, out of that pipeline, that's actually the most interesting. So those things that didn't work 10 years ago that get totally revolutionised, things like as simple as the electric car. You know, the electric car people have been trying to do since what? The C4, that silly little buggy thing. But only by working out why they failed, how they failed, and trying to understand how we put that back into the system, are those things going to succeed. And so the companies that are most sort of fit for innovation are the companies that know how to learn from and understand and develop from failed products and are more interested in things that failed than things that succeeded. Well, the thing for us, and a good industry as an example is the energy industry. So we've started doing a lot of work to help facilitate innovation cycles in energy, which are traditionally 20 to 25 years. And it's a question of understanding how and what we can pull out as being almost, as I say, most audacious points. So what can we test and prove, and how far can we get it in the proving cycle before we've validated it enough to go to IP? And in energy, what happens is every time you write your name on a piece of paper, it goes to IP to get patented. And it's prohibitive to actually ever generating anything. And so we're starting to take things out into their own cycle, so they run separately from the core business. You get to a point where you've validated a product enough to validate that it's worth having any IP on before these things go into IP. So it's not doing anything special, it's just giving things enough room to sort of prove themselves before we spend money and time on IP. And so you accelerate that process that would have been, 3 weeks of coming up with an idea, then it gets 12 months of patenting before anyone actually tests if it's useful. And it's just reordering the order of where that comes in, I think. It's dealing with human beings again. It's a question of balancing, I think, for us, sales and engineering. So it's almost cash flow driven in a lot of cases. It's a case of, well, we need to generate more sales to pay for more engineers, but as soon as you've got more sales, you need more engineers. We grew from 3 people, the next big jump was about 10. Now we're at sort of 25 people and about 80 contractors, and then on top of that, we'll probably look to be, I think the next big jump will be at 50 and 100. And so you get through the stage of everybody works together on a team as one project. Now we're at a stage where you have 3 or 4 teams that work independently. And the thing we're trying to do as we grow to not lose, as you say, that kind of culture and feeling of how RPD delivers projects is keep people quite tight. So project teams are 3 or 4 people, and they remain 3 or 4 people. We don't say, here's 50 people to work on a project. We don't try and embed people into other people's companies. We're trying to maintain the small company and have 50 of them inside us, rather than just becoming larger and larger execution teams. To start with, it was about the admin of understanding how we were going to build a company and an offering. What we do is something that I don't think even now we pass the criteria to officially get through R&D procurement cycles. So it was much about how do we get round the door. If you want to go and work for some of the clients that we work for, a lot of cases you just can't. So we identified opportunities, and a big part of that role was trying to find those, like marketing budgets are very easy to get hold of. If you can get hold of a marketing budget, you don't go through the same kind of procurement cycle, which meant that you could go and design something really interesting and exciting, but not potentially groundbreaking for the company for 20 grand, 50 grand. But then what you could do is you could go back to the R&D side of that same brand and say, well, we already work for you, let's bypass procurement and start doing some good work. And so we kind of, that first year, maybe 2 years, was just about how do we get around the doors rather than just trying to work for 5 years of nothing until we can get through them. I try and withhold myself. I get frustrated by looking at big companies that talk about innovation, want to do innovation, and yet don't understand what that means. And so the reason I do so much of this talking to people and shouting at people and trying to spread the idea of what innovation really means is because that's what we're trying to change. And I think although a lot of things don't make sense, it's actually the things that need to get to market and don't make sense that make what happens next work, It's not necessarily on specific products, but if we see a trend in a company where they're launching things that maybe don't quite make sense for their market, or they're suddenly getting demand and they are not able to deliver it, where we highlight more strategic and more structural problems with the company, that's where we're reaching out to them and saying, let's have a look at this. There's the normal ones like doing your research and understanding everyone. I think the important ones are don't be afraid to be really cheeky and to push things, but also be very open. You can be very cheeky to get meetings, to talk to people, to propose new things, to tell them they're wrong, but what you can't do is tell them they're wrong and pretend you've got the solution. That kind of stuff, that flies very well, and recently we've won a lot of projects off of very big traditional companies that would usually just win this every time, and the reason we're winning it is because we are being cheeky. We're stepping out and saying, well, that's not how you should do it. Here's an idea of how we think we should do it, but what we'd like to do is work with you to find out if that's right. And we're not being ballsy or not being definitive in what we're saying is wrong or right, but what we are doing is stepping out and actually poking. And I think in today's day and age, people are quite scared to poke because everything has a huge liability in it. What we do is not usually considered the most exciting side of the world. So actually, there's an opportunity for us to stand out when you do that sort of thing. And if you can stand out, people recognise you, and if you can be recognised, then you've got a chance to win the business. For us, it's about facilitating the clients to move faster. We're not necessarily trying to come up with a new way of doing things. We're not necessarily trying to come up with a new technology to do things. It's just about giving them the opportunity to make that happen. By removing this R&D process from the core body of the company, we're able to move a lot faster. We're able to go through a lot more checkpoints before we have to go into slower things like, when we start to get into certification, things slow down. So trying to do as much proving ahead of that and trying to help them do as much innovation early before we get slowed down. So it's about removing that process from the bigger company, accelerating it, but then also being able to plug that back in. And after about 2 years of a new product being in market, we actually step away. We're not in the same sense like Accenture or one of these larger, KPMG or EY, where you might go and put 3,000 of your people in another company and make them totally dependent on you. We're actually looking to accelerate new product development cycles, get them into market, prove that that market works, and then step away and they own that. And that's quite powerful. You look at, we have a big white goods company at the moment, and they're very successful in Europe, but actually their products in Asia don't work so well. And so what they want to do is launch a whole range of new products across Asia. But when they look at that, they see a very fragmented market. India versus China versus Thailand versus Singapore is all very, very different attitudes, very, very different behaviors. And so you can't just launch a product in Asia. You have to kind of understand where it's going to fit. And so for them to go and hire a team in each of these countries or each of these regions, hire a manufacturing resource before they even know where that product's going to work doesn't make sense. And so working with us, they're able to sort of say, well, here's 20 insights that we have around these different places and cultures and opportunities. Let's develop those products. Let's get those into those markets. Let's make 10,000, maybe 100,000 units. Where they're successful, we'll then take over and integrate into those places. But what it doesn't mean is we launch a massive office in, Thailand, and actually find the market opportunity is in the center of China, and we're in the wrong place and we've spent all that money. So it's giving them the freedom to scale and experiment very quickly before taking over and finding the most successful things to run away with and do on their own. Mix them up, I think. So I teach at lots of universities, and one of the things I try and get people to do is take the business students or the MBA students and actually put them in the engineering classes, because we get from everywhere, not just Southampton. We get fantastic engineers. We even get fantastic engineers that are really good at working in groups. And I was saying earlier that Southampton is, all the candidates I see are very good at working in teams, but sometimes a lot of engineering degrees lack the sense of realness that comes in engineering that says, well, yes, that is the most viable solution, but it's not because it's expensive or because we haven't considered the long-term effects of the material costs, or the economics of what's going to happen to oil means that this isn't viable 5 years down the line and it's a 10-year development cycle, or all of these considerations. So I would say where the syllabus allows it and where it's going to make sense for, obviously, university targets, combining courses that cover more economics and business with engineering and saying, well, why don't we come in and we've got this brief that's come from RPD, it's a new Formula One wing, and this is where we apply the aerodynamics, but then when we look at the economics of that, that maybe isn't the most viable solution for whatever reason, and trying to take real-world examples and mix up the same kind of components that you would have in real life, I think then it produces students that understand the full aspects and not just the technical engineering and the execution of that. I think one of the things that I would like to see change in education is about bringing real-world scenarios into it. So by saying that, okay, RPD are working on this brief over here, it's a shampoo bottle, but has very interesting flow analysis on the nozzle, and is completely applicable to jet engine design. And now we can get some turbine engineers, and they'll make a shampoo bottle. And it's that cross-referencing that we do a lot in the company, and I think that kind of stuff needs to come into education. And the kind of people we're looking for in students are the people who do that. They look at what they're doing and they go, well, that's interesting, but I can't make it relevant. So I've done this project on the side to kind of understand it for myself or experiment. Or it's most of the case of most of the people we end up hiring, they've found something that helps them make money on the side as part of their degree. So they're the kind of people that succeed. For me, one day I might come back. And that's the continuous issue that I've had and then the company's had all the way along is sort of you're going into big organisations or even small organisations and saying you need to change. And you can't do that. You can't be that audacious to tell people they're wrong. What you need to do is kind of prove these things. So when I started, a lot of it was around doing £100 jobs, £500 jobs, because they start to grow and you prove yourself and you get to the next level and you take it slowly. On the more corporate side, we do something very similar. We start on very small projects. We take them away from the business. If a business can't function in the way that we need it to function to do what we want to do, we'll actually run it separately. And it will run as a separate entity. And so we can prove a point, prove that this works. And you might have to do that 4 or 5 times. This isn't an overnight thing. It's, we go into say an energy company, we develop 4 or 5 products over 2 years. We prove that in those 2 years, those 4 or 5 products sort of in a position that would have taken 15 years to get to traditionally. You start to prove that this is a point, and then you start to bring people in from the traditional way of doing things, and you teach them how this works. And slowly over time, you can either bring those concepts and those ways of doing things back into the organisation, or actually what happens is you take everybody out of the old organisation and they all end up in the new organisation, and you kind of refresh in that way. And people are lost through that process, but that's all part of changing and evolving. So it's about proving small steps, taking that away if you need to prove it separately, and sometimes being cheeky. Sometimes you get asked to do something, you're told to do it a certain way, do it that way, but also do it your way and prove why they were different and better. Because sometimes that's all it needs, is people are scared to say, yes, you can try it. So we run as if you would if you went to Aker Solutions or anyone like that. We would run all the same processes. We're not cutting corners, we're just kind of using that innovative attitude also to how we go around corners neatly. So yeah, we would have the same processes, we'd run the same analysis on things, and that's, I guess that's missing. That's part of the real life world that gets missed out in university, and part of the reason that I was so frustrated when I went into universities, because I'd had to do all that in the past, and when I went into a university and everything was perfectly flat and smooth and there was no friction or anything, it just drove me nuts. So trying to instill that into our engineers as in their first year is a big learning curve. It's not me. I'm not responsible for anything. I just walk around talking and pretending to be important. I think the idea that speeding up that pace of innovation has such an impact on the world for the companies, but also on society as a whole. If you look at the big innovations and how they've changed, the internet is probably the biggest and how the biggest, most impactful thing over the last 20, 30, 40 years. If you thought that actually that development might have taken 20 years to happen of actual hard execution, if that had been 1 year and you could have done 20 of those types of innovations, how does that change society? How does that change the world? And to be one of the companies that are pushing that level of innovation and that speed of innovation within the companies that have the power and the money to do that, and the smaller companies that are pushing against them, is really quite exciting. And I think that kind of enthusiasm shared across the whole company, in terms of maybe looking back in 10 years and thinking, oh God, what did we do there? There's a bit of that in the testing cycle where you're initially developing brand new products. In the iterative cycle, I think the change that we're seeing is a more diverse supply chain. So not producing one product for the entire world, having much more regional products, and we're seeing a lot of companies working with us on actually embedding usage sensors into live products in the streets. And so you could say that actually we produce a product that's just for the Munich market, or just a product that's just for the Paris market. And what we'll see over the next 5 to 10 years, I think, is much more diverse supply chains that allow for that. And so you're having very, very tailored services and very, very tailored devices just for certain types of people and behaviour, and therefore hopefully a much deeper integration into people's lives. And what these companies hope is they'll sell more of them and a deeper, market penetration. Well, we'll have to wait and see for that. I couldn't tell you what's going to happen next week, let alone 40 years. But I think me personally, as I say, that's what I'm excited about, is this idea that we have such a huge influence in everything that we do, and hopefully what happens in the world 5 or 10 years down the line, that's what's exciting. For me, I'm coming to work every day because I want to see what happened. I think, I think that's kind of the core of it, is we have a lot of impact. We're changing a lot of industries. That hopefully has the power to change a lot of things in 5 or 10 years' time, and we're all working towards seeing how that happens and what comes next. Could have been more bullish, I think. Yeah. I think in the moment you're scared to jump or to make big statements or to poke at people you shouldn't poke at. In hindsight, that's the thing that works. Some of the things that have got us furthest are the cheekiest things we've done. Where you've gone and you've emailed some CEO of a massive company and you've just said, the one I tell Ruben a lot is, you send an email and it's just titled coffee ? And the body just says when ? And like really cheeky things like that are the things that have got us furthest in the journey of the company. So being a bit more ballsy, being a bit more of a little is it's always worth doing, I think, in hindsight. For a long time, they didn't quite understand what I was doing. They knew I was working, they knew I was playing, they didn't quite understand what I was doing. So I think it was about 18 when they started to sort of realise that I was telling the truth and that wasn't just fun and games. But now it's a question of them terrified that I'm going to end up unemployed next week. It's something that happens, and it's a conversation that happens a lot internally. We have a good viewpoint on so many different industries and so many new technologies that could be 5 or 10 year horizon stuff. So we're perfectly placed to do our own products. A lot of what we do is we build platforms that then help other companies build those products. So we might say, we've made a new module for this new telecoms format. We know that's going to be live in the next 5 years. So we'll then go help other bigger companies with bigger brands bring things to market on that platform. We do have a few products kind of teetering along as our own brands, but at the moment the focus for the company is about facilitating other people's innovation. And for now, we all need to focus on the same thing or we get distracted.
Well, let's give Josh a big round of applause.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.